She only meant to give a speech, but before the applause faded, a journalist was dead, and her good name lay in ruins. This is Agatha Raisin and the murder of her reputation. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Your comments make this cozy corner feel even warmer. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next mystery. A faint drizzle hung over Carsely like a half-hearted apology. Agatha Raisin, who despised humidity almost as much as humility, stood before her mirror with a curling iron in one hand and an expression of grim concentration. Hodge, her plump tabby, regarded her from the dressing table with the tolerant air of one who had seen too much vanity to be shocked. "Hold still," she told him, though he was the one sitting perfectly still. A moment later, a stray lock of hair sizzled against the iron and emitted the faint smell of despair. Hodge twitched his tail. The tail, unfortunately, brushed the iron. There was a yowl, a flinch, and a dropped implement. "Oh, for heaven's sake!" Agatha dabbed at the tiny singe mark on the cat's fur, then at the larger one on her blouse. It was not the morning of a woman destined for triumph, but she refused to believe that. Tonight was her victory lap. The Carsely Women's Institute had invited her, Agatha Raisin herself, to speak on the modern independent woman. Finally, she would demonstrate that she was more than gossip and gin. By the time she backed her little hatchback from the cottage, the drizzle had thickened into English sincerity. She arrived at the hall 10 minutes late, tyres hissing on the puddled lane. Through the steamed-up windows she could already see the glow of the urn and the shapes of women bustling about like hens at a feed bucket. Inside, the air smelled of sponge cake and moral superiority. Doris Simpson, Agatha's cleaner, and Carsely's chief distributor of news, was ladling tea as if paid by the rumour. Mrs. Bloxby, the vicar's wife, sat near the front, serene, mild, and, Agatha suspected, faintly worried. "There you are, Mrs. Raisin," said Mrs. Greaves, the chairwoman, with the false warmth of one who had been rehearsing the word finally. "We were beginning to think you'd, changed your mind." "Nonsense," said Agatha briskly, brushing raindrops from her teal suit. "I never change my mind. Other people simply take too long catching up with it." A ripple of polite laughter, half genuine, half fearful. Agatha adjusted her spectacles, marched to the lectern, and arranged her index cards like a general setting battle plans. In the back row she noticed a slim young woman tapping a pen against a notepad, the Evesham Echo evidently. Agatha's stomach fluttered. Fame and redemption in one article. What could be finer? She cleared her throat. "Ladies!" The microphone squealed in protest. Doris giggled. Agatha glared. "Ladies," she began again, "when one is a modern independent woman, one must—" She paused. Her eyes flicked to the first card. The typed line read, in bold capitals, "How to snare a man and keep him terrified." The laughter began softly, like wind in long grass, and swelled until even Mrs. Bloxby's composure trembled. Agatha blinked, shuffled to the next card. It was worse. Chapter 2. Catch him young, feed him old. For a moment she stood frozen, mortification prickling her scalp. Someone, some malicious, cackling villain, had replaced her careful notes with filth worthy of a tabloid agony column. This is obviously—" she began, but the words drowned in the mirth. The reporter's pen danced. Doris dropped a biscuit. Mrs. Greaves looked as though she might expire of delight. Agatha's temper, always waiting in the wings, took centre stage. "You think this is funny?" she barked. "Typical. A room full of women ready to tear another down the moment she tries to better herself." She swept the cards into her handbag and marched from the platform, dignity wobbling like a hat in high wind. Behind her, the laughter turned to murmurs, then the murmurs to the delicious buzz of scandal being born. Outside, the drizzle had turned to honest rain. She lit a cigarette with unsteady fingers, puffed furiously, and muttered, "Modern independent idiot." Hodge, waiting patiently on the front seat of the car, blinked reproachfully when she climbed in smelling of humiliation and tobacco. By the time she reached her cottage on Lilac Lane, the village had already passed judgment. The Red Lion's windows glowed invitingly, but she had no appetite for sympathy disguised as curiosity. She poured herself a gin instead, one generous enough to qualify as self-medication. The telephone rang. She ignored it. It rang again, insistent. "What?" "Agatha, dear, "It's Mrs. Bloxby." The vicar's wife never sounded flustered, merely gently disappointed on humanity's behalf. "I just wanted to say that everyone understood it wasn't your fault." "Ha!" They were laughing fit to burst. Sometimes laughter is shock, not cruelty. Rubbish. Carsely couldn't tell compassion from constipation. There was a small silence, then Mrs. Bloxby said, "Try not to dwell. These things fade." "They'd better fade by tomorrow morning," Agatha snapped, "or I'll make them fade." She replaced the receiver with more force than elegance. Hodge, curled on the armchair, opened one amber eye. "Don't you judge me too," she told him, and poured another gin. Morning arrived, thin and grey. Agatha awoke to the postman's clatter and the distinct thud of a newspaper through the letterbox. She shuffled down in slippers, still wrapped in the stale perfume of defeat. The Evesham Echo lay on the mat, headline bold enough to wound, "Local detective's lesson in love causes laughter riot." Below it, a grainy photo of her mid-gesture, mouth open, eyes wild. She felt the kind of nausea usually reserved for ferry crossings and honesty. "Oh, splendid," she muttered, "my reputation murdered before breakfast." She reached for the kettle, because civilization begins with tea, even for the damned. Through the kitchen window she saw Doris Simpson gossiping animatedly with a neighbour. Agatha's name, visible on their lips, fluttered across the hedge like confetti at a funeral. She turned away, jaw tight. There was a knock at the door, sharp, official. Bill Wong stood there, his expression a careful mixture of sympathy and procedure. "Morning, Mrs. Raisin." "If you've come to arrest me for crimes against public speaking, I'll plead guilty." "Nothing like that," he hesitated. "It's Polly Denning, the reporter from the Echo. She was found dead early this morning." The world seemed to tilt. "Dead? What do you mean, dead?" "Strangled. In her car, parked outside the hall." Agatha stared, the mug in her hand suddenly absurd. "Good Lord, but why tell me?" Bill's dark eyes were steady. "Because we found these beside her." He produced a clear evidence bag. Inside lay Agatha's missing index cards, damp with rain, the type still legible. She sank onto a chair. Hodge leapt down, offended by the tension. "That's impossible. They were in my handbag." "We'll need you to confirm that. Forensics are checking fingerprints." "Oh, splendid," she said faintly. "First they laugh at me, now they'll hang me." "No one's hanging anyone, but I'd appreciate it if you didn't leave the village." "Leave? I wouldn't give them the satisfaction." He gave a small, weary smile. "Just take care, Agatha, and perhaps stay off the front pages for a bit." When he'd gone, she poured another measure of gin into her untouched tea and drank it neat. Outside, the drizzle resumed, soft as mockery. Somewhere down the lane, a telephone rang in another house, carrying the next round of gossip. Agatha lit a cigarette, the flame trembling slightly. "Well, Hodge," she said, exhaling a defiant plume, "if someone thinks they can murder me and get away with it, they're in for a shock." Hodge blinked, unimpressed. The smoke curled upward, thin and spiteful, as Carsely hummed with whispers and the scent of scandal. The following morning, sunlight rarely entered Agatha Raisin's cottage uninvited, but this morning it seemed determined to stage an inquest. It speared through the curtains and landed directly on her face, the sort of cruel precision nature reserves for the guilty or hungover. Her head throbbed in rhythm with the grandfather clock downstairs. Hodge was curled on her chest like an especially smug paperweight. Somewhere beneath him, her dressing-gown belt had tightened itself into a hangman's knot. "Off," she croaked. Hodge blinked once, yawned elaborately, and settled deeper. She reached for the bedside table, found a glass that might once have contained water, but now smelled suspiciously of gin, and drained it anyway. On the floor lay yesterday's Evesham Echo, the headline staring up with cheerful malice, "Local sleuth speech turns scandalous, then deadly." She groaned. "Deadly, my foot. I'm not dead, just wishing I were." Downstairs, the kettle began to whistle, though she couldn't remember turning it on. It was probably Hodge's doing. He had more initiative than most men she'd dated. She shuffled down the stairs, the cat trotting ahead like a furry bailiff. The kitchen smelled of stale smoke, gin, and regret. She filled the teapot, lit a cigarette, and stared through the window at the drizzle slanting across Lilac Lane. Two neighbours were already in animated discussion by the hedge, their umbrellas wagging like tongues. Agatha had the uneasy sense her name was being pronounced in italics. A knock came at the door, firm, official. She considered hiding behind the sofa, then decided she was too old for that and flung it open. Bill Wong stood there, rain on his coat and patience in his eyes. "Morning, Mrs. Raisin. You're up early." "Barely alive," she said. "Come in before I collapse in the witness box." He followed her to the kitchen. The smell of smoke made him wince. "Still drinking gin for breakfast?" "Tea with a hint of fortification. Don't nag, Bill, or I'll add brandy." He took a seat, notebook ready. The pathologist confirmed it. Polly Denning was strangled sometime between 10 and midnight. We found her car outside the hall. Agatha bristled. "And why tell me all this? I've enough misery without corpses cluttering up my conscience." "Because the murder weapon was a silk scarf. Same make as yours, pale blue with those little silver paisleys." Her stomach dropped. "I've got dozens of scarves. They multiply in drawers." "This one's embroidered with your initials." Agatha stared at him. Hodge jumped onto the table and began licking the butter. "Don't look at me like that," she said finally. "Someone planted it. I was at home drowning my sorrows." "Alone?" "Unless you count a cat and a bottle of Gordon's." He sighed. "You're not under arrest, but people are talking. Best keep a low profile." "Low profile? When half of Carsely's probably sewing voodoo dolls with my hair." "Just until things settle." He closed his notebook. "I'll be in touch." When he'd gone, she slumped at the table. The tea had gone cold. She poured another shot of gin into it for courage and told herself it counted as antiseptic. By 11 o'clock, the telephone started its campaign. Doris Simpson rang first. "Oh, Mrs. Raisin, I said to Mrs. Bloxby only this morning it couldn't possibly be you, though mind you, they did say the scarf was yours." Agatha cut her off. "Thank you for your faith, Doris. Do me a favour and tell the others I'm too dangerous to gossip about." She slammed the receiver down, lit another cigarette, and glared at the ceiling. The smoke curled into a question mark. The next call was from London, all bright vowels and panic. "Aggie, darling, Roy Silver here. I've just seen the papers. What are you doing murdering journalists? Public relations nightmare." "I didn't murder anyone." "Of course not. But perception, my sweet, perception. I'm drafting a press release as we speak. Beloved sleuth victim of cruel smear." How does that sound? "Like the inside of your brain, sticky and loud. Leave it." "Oh, you'll thank me. Scandal sells, and you've been terribly quiet lately. Goodbye, Roy." She hung up before his outrage could reach falsetto. The phone immediately rang again. She ignored it. A few minutes later, tyres crunched on the gravel outside. She peered through the lace curtain. Charles Frayth's vintage convertible gleamed damply in the drizzle. He entered without knocking, holding a paper bag. "Peace offering," he said, producing 2 croissants. "Thought you might be off solid food, but on buttered apologies." "You'd make a marvellous undertaker," Agatha muttered, but took the bag anyway. She bit into one, found it delicious, and hated him for it. "Terrible business," he said lightly, leaning against the counter. "Imagine, murder in Carsely. You must be thrilled. Back in the limelight." "Very funny. They think I did it." "Of course they do. You're glamorous, temperamental, and prone to homicide of the verbal variety." She gave him a glare sharp enough to cut pastry. "Polly Denning humiliated me. I might have fantasized about strangling her, but so did half the WI. Ah, but they don't own matching scarves. Someone's framing me. I'll find out who." He raised an eyebrow. "Bill Wong will love that." "Bill can stew in his own decency. I'm not letting Carsely call me a murderess." Charles smiled, amused. "You're doing it for justice, then?" "For my reputation," she snapped, then caught his grin. "And justice, in that order." They reviewed what little was known. Polly's handbag untouched, car doors unlocked. No struggle. Whoever killed her had been let in, or trusted. The scarf had been tied with deliberate care. Charles finished his coffee and stood. "Well, darling, do let me know before you uncover any more corpses. It plays havoc with my social calendar." "Don't you dare treat this like sport." He kissed the air near her cheek. "Everything's sport, my dear, especially scandal." When he'd gone, the house felt emptier than before. Hodge leapt onto her lap, tail flicking. She scratched his ears absently, mind whirring. Who'd had access to her things? She pictured her handbag abandoned in the hall during the chaos of the speech. Anyone could have dipped in. The thought brought a certain grim satisfaction. If she could find the culprit, she'd clear her name and enjoy herself doing it. She rang Mrs. Bloxby. "You heard?" "Everyone has," the vicar's wife said gently. "I'm so sorry. Polly Denning was ambitious." Ambitious, my foot. She was a vulture with lipstick. "Try to rest, Agatha. Let the police handle it." They'd lose a game of Cluedo against a turnip. "Even so," Mrs. Bloxby said mildly, "turnips rarely end up suspects." Agatha chuckled despite herself. "You always know how to comfort me, by insulting me gently." "It's a gift," said Mrs. Bloxby. "Promise me you'll keep out of danger." "I promise nothing." "Then at least be careful." After hanging up, Agatha sat for a long time, staring at the rain-blurred window. The village looked deceptively peaceful, neat gardens, smoking chimneys, the faint sound of church bells. Yet beneath it pulsed curiosity, pity, and suspicion. Carsely was a place where nothing happened except to someone's reputation, and hers was now the body on the slab. She poured another gin, lighter this time, and said to Hodge, "If they want scandal, I'll give them substance." Hodge sneezed delicately, which she took as consent. Evening fell, damp and cold. Agatha, wrapped in a cardigan that had lost the will to flatter, tried to read but found every sentence ending with murderess. She switched on the television. The news droned about Brussels and petrol prices. Nothing about Polly Denning. Typical. Carsley's disasters never made it past Morton-in-Marsh. She turned the set off. Silence pressed close. Outside, the lane was misty. Lamplight hazed in the drizzle. Hodge snored on the sofa. Then came the scrape, paper against wood. The letterbox rattled. She froze, cigarette half lit. A folded note lay on the mat. She picked it up, heart drumming. The paper was ordinary, the handwriting neat. 6 words only. You wanted attention. Now you've got it. A drop of rain, or something darker, blurred the last letter. Agatha stood in the quiet cottage, the smoke from her cigarette rising like a question. Somewhere outside, the night carried the faint sound of laughter, soft, distant, and unfriendly. She glanced at Hodge. "Well," she said grimly, "I suppose I asked for excitement." Hodge stretched, unimpressed, and rolled over. The note trembled slightly in her hand as the kettle began to hiss again, filling the silence with domestic menace. Morning in Carsely was not so much peaceful as passive-aggressive. Curtains twitched with the dedication of netted surveillance cameras. By the time Agatha Raisin ventured out to fetch milk from the village shop, her humiliation had achieved full blossom. She could feel the stairs pressing through drizzle. Mrs. Cartwright pretended to rearrange the seed packets, but her ears strained toward Agatha's every step. Even the shop cat appeared judgmental. "Morning, Mrs. Raisin," said Doris Simpson from behind the till, voice bright with false cheer. "Lovely day, if you like damp." "Charming," Agatha replied. She set her milk down with the dignity of a woman refusing to run, though her cheeks burned. "Terrible thing, that murder," Doris continued. "Such a nice girl, that Polly Denning. Well, ambitious perhaps, not afraid of the truth." "She wasn't afraid of printing lies either," snapped Agatha. "And if you're implying, heaven forbid, only saying folk should be careful what they say about others. You never know who might—" "Die mysteriously," Agatha said acidly. "Yes, Doris, I've noticed." A man at the bread counter coughed into his sleeve to hide a grin. Agatha paid, scooped up the milk, and swept out, dignity wobbling slightly on her kitten heels. She told herself she didn't care what they thought. Unfortunately, she did. Back at her cottage, Mrs. Bloxby awaited her with a mild smile and a covered dish. "Lemon drizzle cake," she said. "Comfort in solid form." "If comfort came in gin bottles, I'd be cured," Agatha muttered. Still, she accepted the cake. Mrs. Bloxby sat at the kitchen table, radiating calm like a spiritual radiator. "I wondered if you might take things gently for a few days," she said. "Let the police work." "Gently? They're bungling it. Bill means well, but the rest couldn't catch a cold in January. If I don't defend myself, who will?" "Sometimes humility wins friends." "Humility," said Agatha, "is just cowardice in a hat." Mrs. Bloxby's eyes twinkled. "Even so, perhaps wear the hat for now." "I'll wear it to the Red Lion," Agatha said darkly, "and knock sense into people with the brim." Mrs. Bloxby sighed, which Agatha chose to interpret as approval. The Red Lion, Carsely's social nerve centre, smelled of ale, wet coats, and righteousness. Agatha pushed through the door, chin high. Conversation paused for a beat, long enough to sting, then resumed in a lower register. She marched to the bar. "Half of lager, please, Mr. Jeffers, and a side of honesty." He poured slowly. "You'll not find much of that on tap, Mrs. Raisin." She leaned on the counter. "You knew Polly Denning, everyone did. What was she doing in Carsely?" "Writing some exposé, they say. Village hypocrisy. Her words, not mine." "Hypocrisy," Agatha repeated. "We haven't enough glamour for hypocrisy, just ordinary spite." A few chuckles fluttered. Encouraged, she turned toward the nearest cluster of regulars, retired men guarding their pints like evidence. "Anyone see Polly that night?" "No, Mrs. Raisin," said one, "but we read enough of her." Another added, "She did that piece on Doris's baking, called it an act of carbohydrate terrorism." A ripple of laughter. Even Agatha smiled. It was comforting to know the deceased had spread her venom democratically. "And Mrs. Bloxby?" Agatha asked, lowering her voice. "She was misquoted, wasn't she?" "Oh, aye. Said the vicar's wife could forgive anything short of adultery. Had half the parish wondering who'd tested it." Agatha winced. Poor Mrs. Bloxby. Kindness weaponized into gossip. Polly Denning had certainly known how to prick egos. "What about Mrs. Greaves?" she pressed. "Chairwoman of the WI. Polly interviewed her." "That one looked fit to burst," said Jeffers. "Polly was digging about missing raffle money. Claimed she'd follow the trail to the truth." Agatha's pulse quickened. Missing money, trembling hands. Yes, there was something there. She finished her lager, ignored the sympathetic smirks, and strode out into the drizzle. The WI hall loomed ahead, all municipal gloom and peeling paint. Inside, Mrs. Greaves was stacking chairs with the air of a woman single-handedly upholding civilization. "Mrs. Raisin," she said tightly, "if you've come to accuse me, kindly make an appointment." "I've come to ask questions," Agatha said, setting down her handbag. "Purely civic curiosity. The police already asked theirs." "Yes, and they probably asked whether you prefer jam or cream first on scones. I'm more interested in facts." Mrs. Greaves's hands fluttered to her pearls. "Really, this is unseemly. Polly Denning was a troublemaker. So you admit you disliked her?" "Dislike is not murder, Mrs. Raisin." "No, but it does warm the hands on a cold night." The chairwoman's lips thinned. Agatha noticed the tremor again, the tiny twitch in the fingers, the quick glance toward the cupboard at the back. "Mind if I look around?" "Yes." "Good, because I already am." Agatha crossed to the cupboard and opened it before protest could form. Only paper decorations and a faint smell of floor polish. Still, Mrs. Greaves's alarm seemed genuine. Too genuine, perhaps. "Nervous, aren't we?" "Because you're barging about like a policeman. You forget yourself, Mrs. Raisin." "Hardly. Everyone else is remembering me too vividly." Mrs. Greaves pressed a handkerchief to her face. "That woman wanted to ruin me. Said she'd print I'd misused WI funds. She called me a thief." Agatha hesitated. Tears streaked the powder. The trembling looked more fear than guilt, or good acting. "If you've nothing to hide, why so jumpy?" "Because someone broke into the hall last night." Mrs. Greaves pointed to a window latch. It dangled loose. "Police said vandals, but You think they were after something?" "Her notebook," Mrs. Greaves whispered. "She carried it everywhere. Names, secrets, lies. It's missing." That was a gift to Agatha's curiosity. "And the dictaphone she used?" "Gone as well." Agatha's mind ticked. Missing evidence, frightened witness, gossip like petrol fumes. The village might look sleepy, but its conscience was awake and wriggling. "Thank you, Mrs. Greaves," she said briskly. "If you remember anything else, I shall tell the police, not you." "Suit yourself," Agatha said. "They'll lose the note under a teapot anyway." She left to the sound of the door slamming behind her. Outside, the rain had deepened to a sulky drizzle. Agatha walked slowly back through the village, replaying what she'd learned. Polly Denning had been threatening to expose corruption. If Mrs. Greaves was innocent, someone else at the WI had reason to panic. She stopped by the vicarage. Mrs. Bloxby answered, serene as ever, though her eyes flickered at the sight of Agatha's determined face. "I told you humility would be safer," she said mildly. "And I told you humility's overrated. Listen, Polly was after a scandal in the WI. Funds missing, notebook vanished, dictaphone gone. That's not coincidence." Mrs. Bloxby frowned. "The Women's Institute can be competitive, but murder?" "You've seen those cake competitions," said Agatha. People would kill over sponge texture. Mrs. Blocksby smiled despite herself. Do be careful, dear. Curiosity is rarely rewarded kindly in Carsely. Agatha lit a cigarette. Then I'll settle for being rewarded accurately. The vicar's wife sighed, but there was affection in it. Come to tea tomorrow. We'll talk sense into you, or at least feed you. Evening fell soft and grey. Agatha sat at her kitchen table, notes spread before her like battle plans. Hodge prowled among them, tail sweeping crumbs from the lemon cake. Don't look at me like that, she told him. I'm getting somewhere. Missing notebook, nervous chairwoman, misquoted vicar's wife. There's a pattern. He meowed pointedly at his empty dish. She fed him, poured herself a modest gin for thinking purposes, and tried to ignore the gloom pressing at the window. The telephone remained silent. So did the lane outside. She told herself she enjoyed the quiet, that it meant control returning. But her hands wouldn't stop fidgeting. At 9 o'clock the letterbox clicked. She froze. Another envelope slid through, plopping softly onto the mat. Her heart gave an unprofessional lurch. If that's another threat, Hodge, I'm emigrating to Wales. She picked it up. No postmark, hand-delivered. Inside, a cassette tape, unlabelled. Ordinary, except for the faint smear of ink across its side, as though someone had grabbed it in haste. She turned it over, unease fluttering pleasantly in her chest. Curiosity and fear had always been her favourite mix. Fetching the small tape recorder she used for dictating shopping lists, she slotted it in and pressed play. A burst of static, then a woman's voice, steady, clipped, unmistakably Polly Denning. If anything happens to me, the voice said, start with the Women's Institute. Agatha's hand hovered above the stop button. The tape hissed into silence. Hodge jumped onto the table, tail brushing her cheek as if demanding attention. Well, my boy, she murmured, lighting a cigarette with deliberate calm, seems the dead are finally joining the gossip. The smoke curled upward, carrying the faint scent of lemon and mystery through the little cottage, while outside the drizzle whispered like applause. The drizzle had taken the day off, leaving Carsely damp but oddly luminous. The lanes gleamed like wet pewter as dusk settled over the village. Inside her cottage, Agatha Raisin sat with a gin in one hand, a packet of cheese and onion crisps in the other, and the late Polly Denning whispering from the tape recorder. The journalist's voice was brisk, confident, irritatingly young. Interview with Mrs. Greaves regarding Women's Institute funds. Subject evasive. Mentions donation from vicar's wife, unverified. Baker accused of jealousy. Possible blackmail angle. Agatha paused the tape, crumbs in her lap. Petty rivalries, she muttered. If I'd known scandal paid this well, I'd have started a column myself. Hodge sprawled on the table, one paw on the notebook she'd been attempting to fill with observations. His tail thumped each time she wrote something he found unconvincing. You're no help, she told him. You think tuna's the answer to everything. She rewound the tape and listened again. Polly's next entry crackled through static. A low conversation recorded in the background. Two women, one saying sharply, "She'll destroy us if she prints it." Then a click and silence. Agatha leaned back. "Destroy who?" she murmured. The gin supplied courage and imagination in equal measure. She decided she needed expert consultation, which in her world meant Charles Fraith. Charles arrived the next morning in his open-topped vintage car, coat collar turned up against the cold expression of cheerful superiority firmly in place. "Darling, I was just on my way to absolutely nowhere when I thought of you." "Touching," said Agatha. "I've got something to play you." "Not one of your musical experiments, I hope." She ignored that. They sat in the kitchen while she pressed play again. The tape hissed. Polly's voice filled the room and Charles leaned back, expression thoughtful. When it ended, he said, "Rather dull, isn't it? Petty theft, jealousy, hypocrisy. Hardly Hamlet." "You're missing the point," Agatha said sharply. "Polly was killed right after recording this. She was chasing a scandal worth dying for. Someone thought she might print their name." "Or yours," Charles said sweetly. She glared. "If you're not going to help—" "Oh, I'll help," he interrupted, "partly because you'll do something reckless without me, and partly because Evesham has excellent pastry." She snorted but fetched her coat. Hodge watched them go, tail flicking, as though unimpressed by human priorities. Evesham was its usual mixture of charm and cheap parking frustration. The offices of the Evesham Echo occupied a converted townhouse that smelled of ink and coffee. Rupert Blake, the editor, was a lean man with a nose built for sniffing scandal. He recognised Agatha with undisguised amusement. "Ah, Mrs. Raisin, the star of our most read article this month. How are your public speaking engagements?" "Thriving," she said coldly. "You printed lies." "We printed humour. Our readers enjoy it." "Your journalist's dead," she snapped. "Still finding that amusing?" The smile slipped. He gestured to chairs. "Sit down, and tell me why you're here, apart from threatening the free press." Charles gave her a warning look. Agatha ignored it. "Polly was investigating something in the WI. She mentioned a scandal worth dying for. Any idea what she meant?" Rupert leaned back, folding his long fingers. "She was ambitious. Said she'd uncovered moral corruption in the heart of respectability. Frankly, I thought she meant adultery. Small villages thrive on it." "You think she was having an affair herself?" "Good Lord, no. She was too calculating for romance." He hesitated. "But she'd been receiving anonymous messages, threats maybe. Said they'd clip her tongue if she didn't keep it. I told her to go to the police." "And did she?" "I doubt it. Polly liked danger, made her feel important." Agatha scribbled the phrase anonymous threats into her notebook. "Who would know that?" "You'd be surprised how many people tell editors everything." "And how many of them are married," Charles murmured. Agatha ignored him again. "Did she mention anyone specific? A donor, perhaps? Someone she accused of stealing?" Rupert shrugged. "Only that it would shock the saintliest woman in Carsely." Agatha froze. "Mrs. Bloxby?" "If that's the vicar's wife, yes. She came up once." "That's absurd," she snapped. "She'd rather die than sin." "You'd be amazed what virtue hides, Mrs. Raisin." Charles's eyebrow lifted. "Or who hides behind virtue." Agatha's irritation flared. "I'm sure Mrs. Bloxby's only sin is undersugaring her tea. Come on." Outside, the chill wind carried the smell of wet leaves and diesel. Agatha lit a cigarette. "He's lying. Journalists always lie. It's professional pride." Charles smirked. "And what's yours? Professional vanity?" "Professional competence," she said curtly. "I'll prove it." When they returned to Carsely, Doris Simpson was waiting by Agatha's gate, scarf wound round her head like a defiant flag. "Mrs. Raisin, I've something to tell you. I didn't want to bother the police. They'd only make a fuss." "Come in, Doris," Agatha said, suppressing curiosity with difficulty. Inside, she poured tea, though gin would have been more efficient. Doris perched on the edge of a chair. "That night, the murder night, I saw someone leaving the WI hall. A woman in a floral coat. Looked just like yours." Agatha nearly dropped the teapot. "Mine? Are you mad? I was home." I know. I'm just saying it looked like yours. Same pattern. Red roses. Only shorter, perhaps. Could have been anyone." "But you told the police." "Not yet. Didn't want to stir things, but people talk." "They'd talk more if you didn't," Agatha muttered, lighting a cigarette. "Thank you, Doris. You've been most illuminating." After she left, Charles chuckled. "So now you've got a twin, darling, or someone who shops at the same tragic boutique." "Someone's framing me," Agatha said grimly, "and they're enjoying it." Later that afternoon, Bill Wong arrived, mud on his shoes and patience in short supply. "You've been questioning people again," he said. "I was making polite inquiries." "You don't do polite." "Don't scold me, Bill. I found out Polly was threatened. I've also found her editor's a snake. Leave it to us." "You? You'll file it under unsolved mysteries and tea breaks." "Agatha," he said wearily, "you're a suspect. Every time you play detective, you make it worse. Then perhaps I'll solve it and save you the trouble. Promise me you won't interfere." "Of course," she said sweetly. Bill groaned. "That tone means you already have." He left, shaking his head. Agatha felt a flicker of guilt, which she cured with another gin. By evening, the village hummed again. Word had spread that another tape, yes, another, had been sent anonymously to the Evesham Echo. This one contained Polly's voice naming a liar who hides behind sermons. It was enough to send every parishioner into speculation frenzy. At the Red Lion, Agatha heard whispers. The vicar's wife, charity money, forgiveness, hiding sin. She slammed her glass down and stalked out before someone said it aloud. At the vicarage, Mrs. Bloxby opened the door, face pale but calm. "I expected you," she said softly. "You're being slandered," Agatha burst out. "Another tape's gone to the paper. Calls you a liar." "Yes, Mr. Blocksby showed me the message from the editor. He wanted comment before printing." "And you didn't strangle him on the spot? That's restraint." Mrs. Blocksby smiled faintly. "Anger only feeds gossip. The truth will out." Agatha felt a rush of fierce protectiveness. "They'll crucify you, and you're still calm." "I know what I've done and what I haven't. Can everyone else say the same?" Her quiet dignity deflated Agatha's fury. "I'll find who's doing this. They'll regret touching you." "Do be careful," Mrs. Blocksby said gently. "You fight like fire, bright but destructive." Agatha nodded stiffly, pretending her eyes merely smarted from the cold. That night the air felt brittle, as though the Cotswolds had been polished too hard. Agatha settled on the sofa, tape recorder on the table, Hodge curled against her thigh. She replayed the first cassette, listening for nuances she might have missed. The background hum, the faint scrape before Polly's warning. Nothing new. "You're dead and still making mischief," she muttered. Hodge purred, unimpressed. She switched the recorder off, poured a small nightcap, and drew the curtains. Outside, the lane was silent except for the occasional drip of water from the eaves. She had almost convinced herself peace had returned when a crash shattered the moment. Glass exploded inward, the sitting-room window. Hodge shot off like a furry bullet. Agatha ducked, heart hammering, then straightened cautiously. A stone lay on the carpet, tied to a scrap of paper. Her fingers shook slightly as she untied it. The note read, in the same neat hand as before, "Stop digging, or your next headline will be your obituary." She stared at it, pulse pounding. For once she felt the cold edge of real fear. Then, because fear made her angry, she reached for her cigarettes. "They think they can scare me, Hodge," she said, striking a match. "Idiots. If I die, I'll haunt them until their scones collapse." The cat reappeared from under the sideboard, fur puffed but dignity intact. He blinked at her, then began licking a paw as if cleaning up after chaos was a daily chore. Agatha sat back in the armchair, the cigarette smoke mingling with the faint scent of gin and rain. Outside, the wind sighed along the hedgerows, carrying whispers from a village that always knew too much, and sometimes far too little. Carsely wore its spring drizzle like gossip, fine, persistent, and impossible to escape. Agatha Raisin stood at her kitchen window, watching puddles multiply along Lilac Lane, and decided that if the village wanted drama, she would give them theatre. Nothing soothed a scandal like hospitality, or, failing that, it at least provided cake. "An innocent little tea," she told Hodge, who blinked sceptically from the armchair. "Just friends and neighbours. No one will suspect a thing." He yawned, unimpressed. Agatha ignored him and began telephoning. Within half an hour she had secured the attendance of half the Women's Institute. Charles Fraith, only for the scones, darling. Roy Silver, public relations reconnaissance. And reluctantly Mrs. Blocksby, who sensed carnage but agreed to come out of kindness. By 4 o'clock the cottage was perfumed with cheap flowers, overbrewed tea, and tension. Agatha had changed her outfit twice before settling on a rose print blouse, feminine enough to disarm, but practical for battle. Guests began arriving, umbrellas dripping in the hallway. Doris Simpson came first, arms full of homemade shortbread and fresh gossip. "You're brave, Mrs. Raisin," she whispered, hanging her mac. "After everything, people are dying quicker than we can bake sympathy cakes." "Cheerful thought," said Agatha, plastering on a smile. "Do come in." Roy swept through next in a cloud of cologne and enthusiasm. "Aggie, my sweet, look at you, hostess with the most stress." "Mind your mouth," she hissed. "This is reconnaissance, not cabaret." "Oh, relax," he said, flouncing into the sitting room. "If we're murdered, at least we'll be properly accessorized." Charles arrived last, coat damp, but grin intact. "Couldn't resist," he said. "I adore bloodshed over bone china." Agatha resisted the urge to throttle him with a napkin. By 4:30 the room was full. Steam from the teapot mingled with perfume and suspicion. Mrs. Greaves sat bolt upright on the sofa, eyes wary. Mrs. Blocksby poured tea with unshakable serenity. Doris busied herself with biscuits. Roy fluttered dangerously close to the furniture. And Charles, naturally, was sprawled in the armchair like a cat in a sunbeam. "Now then," Agatha began, adopting her most innocent tone. "We've all had such a dreadful time lately, haven't we? I thought a bit of community spirit might do us good." "Very kind," murmured Mrs. Greaves, though her voice trembled slightly. "And perhaps," Agatha added airily, "we can put some of these nasty rumours to rest, about missing money and the like." The air froze. Mrs. Greaves's teaspoon clinked against her saucer. Roy chose that moment to reach for a scone and knocked an entire cup of scalding tea into his lap. "Ow! I'm melting!" he shrieked, leaping up. Agatha thrust a napkin at him. "For heaven's sake, sit down before you take out an eye." Charles was laughing helplessly. "Marvellous timing, Roy. I haven't enjoyed tea this much in years." "If I die of shock," Roy snapped, "bury me somewhere stylish." The chaos diffused some tension, but not enough. Agatha caught Doris's eye. The older woman nodded discreetly and slipped her a folded note beneath the plate of sandwiches. Agatha waited until the conversation resumed. Weather, scones, the eternal British dance of deflection, then unfolded it under the table. The note read, "Ask about the raffle money." Her eyes flicked to Mrs. Greaves. The woman's hands were shaking again. "Mrs. Greaves," Agatha said sweetly, "I was just thinking about that splendid WI raffle last month. How much did we raise?" Mrs. Greaves went pale. Nearly £300, I believe. And all accounted for?" "Of course." But her voice was brittle. "Why would you ask such a thing?" "Because Polly Denning did," Agatha said bluntly. "And now she's dead." A murmur rippled through the room. Roy stopped fussing with his trousers. Mrs. Bloxby looked pained. Charles watched with the expression of a man enjoying an opera. "You have no right," Mrs. Greaves said, rising unsteadily. "This is indecent." Before Agatha could retort, the doorbell rang. She opened it to find Mrs. Bloxby's husband, the vicar, looking grave. "Forgive me," he said. "My wife forgot her handbag." Mrs. Bloxby rose, calm as ever. "Thank you, dear." But as she turned, her expression shifted, something fierce behind the gentleness. She looked straight at Mrs. Greaves. "Forgiveness is one thing," she said softly. "Fraud is another." The room went still. Mrs. Greaves swayed. Her teacup clattered to the floor. I don't know what you mean," she gasped, then slumped back, fainting dead away. "Good heavens," said Roy, delighted. "Does this happen at all your teas?" "Charles," snapped Agatha, "help me lift her head. Roy, stop admiring yourself and fetch water." It took several minutes to revive the unfortunate woman. When she finally stirred, she looked terrified rather than ill. "Please," she whispered, gripping Agatha's wrist. "They told me to keep quiet." "Who told you?" Agatha pressed. But Mrs. Greaves only shook her head weakly. "No more questions, please." The vicar helped her outside. Mrs. Bloxby followed silently. The remaining guests exchanged uneasy glances, then mumbled excuses and fled. "Well," said Charles, surveying the wreckage of cups and crumbs, "that went splendidly." "Oh, shut up," Agatha said. "Someone scared her half to death, and I'm going to find out who." "You do realize you terrify people even without trying," he said mildly. "Then I'm qualified," she snapped. An hour later, after everyone had gone, the cottage felt deflated, like a stage after the curtain drops. Agatha sat at the kitchen table, smoking furiously while Hodge watched her with faint disdain. "You saw her," she muttered. "That wasn't guilt. That was fear." The cat yawned, unimpressed by human nuance. She grabbed her coat. "Stay here. Guard the gin." Mrs. Greaves lived in a neat bungalow at the end of Church Lane, its garden as precise as her personality. The curtains were drawn, but a faint light glowed behind them. Agatha rang the bell. No answer. She knocked harder. Finally the door opened a crack. Mrs. Greaves peered out, pale and dishevelled. "What do you want?" she whispered. "To make sure you're all right. You nearly fainted into my lemon drizzle." Mrs. Greaves hesitated, then let her in. The house smelled of lavender polish and anxiety. Papers lay scattered across the dining table. Letters, receipts, and what looked suspiciously like WI accounts. "I shouldn't have come," Agatha said lightly. "I'm the village pariah at the moment." "You shouldn't have invited them," Mrs. Greaves murmured. "They'll think you know too much now." Agatha's pulse quickened. "Who will?" "They said, if I talked, they'd ruin me. They'd ruin everyone." "Who are they, exactly?" But Mrs. Greaves pressed a handkerchief to her mouth, shaking her head. "I can't. Please, go." Agatha wanted to push harder, but something in the woman's trembling stopped her. There was real terror there, the kind that made people obedient. "All right," she said gently. "Try to rest." "You don't understand," Mrs. Greaves whispered. "It isn't over." Agatha left feeling uncharacteristically subdued. The night air was damp, the hedges whispering in the wind. For once she resisted lighting a cigarette. The darkness seemed thick enough to strike without flame. Back home she poured a modest gin and sat staring at the window, half expecting another stone. None came. Hodge padded across her lap, warm and heavy. "You'd think people could commit murder without ruining the social calendar," she muttered. He purred, unimpressed. At 10 o'clock the phone rang. It was Bill Wong. "Agatha? You didn't happen to hold a gathering today, did you?" "Who told you?" "Half the village. Next time try a smaller guest list." His tone softened. "Look, stay home tonight. We're making progress." "Progress meaning you've arrested the wrong person again?" "Progress meaning you're not the only suspect anymore," he said dryly. "Good night, Agatha. Please, behave." She smiled faintly. "Define behave." He hung up. Carsely woke to the sound of police sirens, an alien noise among its hedgerows and hens. Curtains twitched, dogs barked, and the village heartbeat began to gallop. Mrs. Greaves was dead, and this time there was no pretending it was natural. Agatha Raisin stood at her gate, watching the blue lights flash against the drizzle. The gossip travelled faster than the rain. Mrs. Greaves had been found at her desk, cup of tea untouched, a dictaphone beside her. The police were everywhere, men in dark coats trampling rosebeds that had taken months to coax into respectability. "It's a circus," muttered Agatha, lighting a cigarette with hands that trembled more from fury than fear. Bill Wong approached, clipboard in hand, expression grim. "You shouldn't be here, Agatha." "Don't be absurd. I live here." "Meaning you're at the centre of every rumour again. Don't make it worse." "You make it sound as if I've opened a franchise," she said tartly. He sighed. "This isn't a joke. Mrs. Greaves was poisoned. Traces of a tranquilizer in her tea." Agatha blinked. "Poisoned? Good grief. Can't anyone in Carsely manage a simple cup of tea without homicide?" Bill didn't smile. "It's serious." And the dictaphone was running, nothing on it but static. She stubbed out her cigarette. "Static can be tampered with." "So can stories," he said, and walked away. By midday, journalists had descended on the village like crows. The Evesham Echo parked a van by the green, and a television crew from Cheltenham prowled for locals willing to weep on camera. Doris Simpson, of course, obliged. "She was a fine woman, Mrs. Greaves," Doris told the reporter, dabbing theatrically at her eyes. "Always honest with the WI money, despite what folks say, except, of course, when she wasn't." Agatha groaned. Subtle as a brass band, that one. Charles Fraith appeared beside her, immaculate despite the mud. "Enjoying the spectacle?" "It's ghastly. They'll be setting up souvenir stalls next." "You sound jealous," he said mildly. "Everyone's talking about someone else for a change." "Don't push your luck," she warned. He smiled. "Come along, darling. If the killer's targeting those connected to the tapes, perhaps we should put ourselves in danger. Safely, of course." "A sting operation?" Her mood lifted a little. "You think we can flush them out?" "I think you'll look marvellous doing it." "Flattery will get you gin," she said, already scheming. That evening they convened at the Red Lion to plan. The pub was packed, villagers speaking in the hushed tones of people desperate to be overheard. The air was heavy with malt and fear. Charles sipped his pint. "We make it known that we have copies of Polly's tapes. Whoever's frightened will panic." "They might also strangle me," said Agatha. "Worth the risk," he murmured. "For you, perhaps. You'd inherit my gin cabinet." Roy Silver burst through the door like a gust of sequins. "Aggie, darling, I've just come from London. Half the press think you're the murderer again. Isn't it marvellous exposure?" "Roy," she said, "if you value your exposure, keep it out of my sight." He pouted. "I was only trying to help. You should hire me officially. Crisis Management, Agatha Raisin Limited." "I already have one crisis, thank you." Bill Wong entered then, nodding at them warily. "I thought I'd find you here." "Working hard, as you see," said Agatha. "Word of advice, stop it. We're examining Mrs. Greaves's bank records. Several mysterious withdrawals, amounts matching the missing charity funds." "So she was skimming?" "Maybe, but that doesn't explain why she was terrified. Her diary mentions being threatened again. Tonight." "Who by?" "Just an initial. R." Agatha frowned. "R as in Rupert Blake, the editor." "Or Roy," Charles murmured, eyes twinkling. Ha ha, Roy said. Even I draw the line at poison. Bill's voice softened. Agatha, I know you want to prove yourself, but you're skating on thin ice. 2 deaths linked to you. It doesn't look good. So what do you expect me to do? Knit quietly while someone frames me? Yes, said Bill, or at least knit quietly indoors. She gave him a tight smile. You forget. I'm from Birmingham. We don't freeze easily. He shook his head and left. Charles raised his glass. To Agatha Raisin, the woman most likely to be murdered next. Cheers, she said darkly, and drank. Later at home, Mrs. Blocksby dropped by with her calm voice and moral clarity. I brought soup, she said, setting down a thermos. You probably haven't eaten. I'm too busy being public enemy number 1. The police are only doing their jobs. Badly. Mrs. Blocksby sat, folding her hands. You're taking this too personally. Someone tried to destroy my reputation and is now destroying everyone else's. How's that not personal? Because, dear, said Mrs. Blocksby gently, sometimes dignity survives only if we stop defending it. Agatha blinked. You mean I should just let them walk all over me? No, but you can't fight gossip with fury. It only feeds it. That's all very saintly, Agatha said, lighting a cigarette, but saints get murdered too. True, said Mrs. Blocksby, smiling faintly, but they're remembered kindly. When the vicar's wife left, the house felt colder. Hodge mewed softly, rubbing against Agatha's leg. She stooped to scratch him, muttering, She means well, but she's never been accused of homicide. Not yet. The next day brought more revelations. Bill called to confirm the toxicology report, a strong sedative in Mrs. Greaves's tea. Not enough to kill instantly. She must have sipped it knowingly, perhaps trusting the wrong visitor. And the diary? Agatha asked. The entries smudged, but she wrote, R called, demanded repayment, threatened again, tonight. R for Rupert, said Agatha. He admitted knowing Polly was investigating the WI. Could also be Rita Henshaw, Bill said. She handled the WI accounts before Mrs. Greaves. We're checking. Rita's too dim to threaten anyone. She once fainted at a raffle draw. Nevertheless, we'll question her. You stay out of it. Agatha hung up and immediately ignored him. By late afternoon, Carsely's hysteria had reached fever pitch. At the post office, someone hissed that the WI was cursed. At the butcher's, Mrs. Cartwright swore she'd seen Mrs. Greaves's ghost wandering by the duck pond. At the Red Lion, 2 old men debated whether Agatha was a murderer or merely unlucky. Unlucky, one decided. Murderers usually tidy up after themselves. Agatha overheard and took grim satisfaction in the word usually. When she returned home, Charles was waiting in her kitchen, reading the newspaper. You've made page 3 again, he said cheerfully. They used that dreadful photo from your speech. If there's any justice, the photographer will be next on the hit list. You could always sue. I prefer revenge, quicker results. She showed him her notebook. Look, Mrs. Greaves's diary mentions R and Rupert Blake fits perfectly. He had motive, access, and the moral flexibility of a weather vane. So, what's your plan, Sherlockette? I'm going to ring him. See how he reacts. At least let me be present when you antagonize the next suspect. It's only a phone call. So, was the one that killed conversation, Charles murmured. She waited until evening. The cottage was quiet except for Hodge snoring near the fire. Rain tapped the windows softly, a rhythm of nerves. Agatha poured herself a stiff gin, steadied her voice and dialed the number for the Evesham Echo. Editorial, said a bored voice. Rupert Blake, please. Who's calling? Agatha Raisin. Tell him I've worked out what R stands for. A pause, then faintly, Hold, please. Static filled the line. She paced, cigarette burning between her fingers. Hodge opened one eye, unimpressed by suspense. At last the receiver clicked. She heard breathing, slow, deliberate, masculine. Mr. Blake, she said. The breathing continued, louder now. Then a scrape like a chair moving. She felt the hairs rise on her arms. Rupert? Another click. The line went dead. Agatha stared at the receiver, heartbeat hammering. Well, she muttered, that wasn't ominous at all. She poured another gin, stronger this time. Hodge stretched luxuriously, tail flicking against her arm as if to remind her that life, for cats, remained blissfully simple. Outside, the drizzle thickened again, muting the village into silence. Agatha drew on her cigarette, the smoke curling lazily upward, and wondered, not for the first time, whether Carsely itself might be cursed. The kettle began to whistle softly. Hodge blinked at her, then yawned. "All right," she said, exhaling. "Tea it is. Poison-free, one hopes." She crossed to the stove, the rain pattering on the window like polite applause. Behind her, the telephone sat silent and dark, waiting, like the village, for the next body to drop. Morning broke flat and grey, as if the Cotswolds had mislaid their colour palette. Agatha Raisin glared at the weather from her window, cigarette in hand, and muttered, "Perfect day for interrogating a liar." Hodge, sprawled across the windowsill, yawned. "You're no use," she told him. "If you could drive, I'd take you instead of Charles." Right on cue, a horn honked outside, the aristocratic bleat of Charles Frayth's vintage convertible. He leaned on it as though born to summon servants. "Coming!" she shouted, grabbing her handbag, coat, and a folder marked Notes, Murder and Idiots. Charles regarded her with affectionate disdain as she climbed in. "You look like a woman off to buy back her reputation wholesale." "I intend to," she said. "And if Rupert Blake's guilty, I'll make sure he regrets meeting me." "Most men do, darling, but I'm sure his turn will be memorable." Evesham was a picture of commercial mediocrity. Half-shuttered shops, damp posters, and pigeons plotting insurrection. The Evesham Echo occupied a narrow building between a charity shop and a bakery that smelled faintly of despair. Inside, typewriters clacked and phones rang with the urgency of gossip. Rupert Blake emerged from his office, tall, sharp-featured, his smile polished to professional insincerity. "Mrs. Raisin? Sir Charles? What a pleasure. Or are you here to sue?" "Tempting," said Agatha, "but I've a better offer. The truth." "We don't print that often," he said lightly. "Tea?" "No. I'm particular about my poisons." Charles hid a grin behind his sleeve. Rupert ushered them into his glass-walled office, where stacks of old issues leaned like cynical monuments. He perched on the desk edge. "You've heard, I expect, that poor Mrs. Greaves met an unfortunate end." "Unfortunate people keep meeting me lately," Agatha said. "You worked with Polly Denning. She died chasing a story. About WI funds, wasn't it?" "That was her obsession," Rupert said smoothly. "She claimed corruption. I told her to stick to baking competitions. She ignored me, as ambitious girls do." "And you?" "I'm a journalist, Mrs. Raisin, not a murderer. Our paper thrives on scandals. Dead ones are bad for business." Agatha studied him. There were faint scratches on his wrist, half hidden by a cuff. She leaned closer. "Busy cat at home?" He stiffened. "Rose bushes," he said too quickly. "Ah, horticultural homicide. How Cotswold?" Charles coughed to hide his laughter. Agatha's eyes drifted to a small waste bin near the desk. The ashtray atop it was cold, but underneath she glimpsed blackened scraps of paper. The smell of burned ink lingered. "Had a bonfire in the office?" she asked. "Old drafts," Rupert said. "We tidy up occasionally." "Do you? You should try that attitude with your conscience." He sighed. "You're amusing, Mrs. Raisin, but you're trespassing on grief. I liked Polly. She was reckless, not suicidal." "And Mrs. Greaves?" "Barely knew her. Though she wrote a letter last week demanding Polly's notes back. Said they'd been stolen." "And did you return them?" "Didn't have them." "You always have everything," Agatha said dryly. "Except honesty." He stood abruptly. "I've indulged you enough. Unless you've evidence, kindly leave before I call security." Charles rose lazily. "Do. They might liven the place up." Outside, drizzle had resumed its patient assault. Charles turned up his collar. "Well, he's rattled." "And scratched," said Agatha. "He's hiding something. Those ashes, maybe Polly's notes, maybe Mrs. Greaves's letter." "Or his failed love poems," Charles said. "Hard to tell with men like him." "We'll find out. I want those ashes analysed." "By whom, darling? Scotland Yard?" "By me," she snapped. "If I can reconstruct a soufflé from powder, I can manage paper." "You've never managed a soufflé in your life." "Details," said Agatha. "Drive." They were halfway back to Carsely when a flash of silver overtook them. Roy Silver, in sunglasses large enough to signal aircraft. He screeched to a halt in front of them, blocking the lane, and leapt out waving. "Aggie, Charles, my favourite doomed duo." "Roy, for pity's sake, you nearly caused a pile-up," said Agatha. "Darling, calm yourself. I've brought fabulous news. You're trending." "What?" "Well, in my office at least. I've convinced half London that you're the plucky amateur sleuth persecuted by envy and small-town spite. Think Miss Marple meets the sun. Agatha groaned. I don't want pity. I want justice. Justice doesn't sell papers, Roy said breezily. But redemption does. Imagine, Agatha Raisin, the woman who dared. We'll do a photo shoot, a little smoke, a lot of lipstick. Shut up, Roy, she said, but her vanity prickled pleasantly. Still, she mused, the idea of being the woman who dared isn't awful. Charles sighed. And there it is, the spark that kills logic. Roy grinned. Fame redeems everything, my dear. No, it causes everything, Agatha snapped. Jealousy, lies, murder. People like Rupert thrive on it. For once, Roy fell silent. Back in Carsely, Bill Wong was waiting by Agatha's gate, his expression grim. You've been to Evesham. You've been spying. I've been working. Rupert Blake's name just appeared in Mrs. Greaves's financial records. Anonymous account. Same bank as the missing WI funds. Agatha whistled softly. So he was laundering the money? Possibly, but we can't prove it yet. Then we will. You will not, said Bill. You'll stay out of it. We have procedures. Procedures don't solve murders, Bill. People do. People like you end up suspects, he retorted. Charles intervened diplomatically. We'll, of course, behave. Eventually. Bill rolled his eyes. If you hear from Rupert again, tell me immediately. Naturally, said Agatha, meaning naturally she wouldn't. That night, the drizzle thickened into honest rain. Agatha sat by the fire, sorting through the folder of notes she'd scribbled in what she optimistically called detective shorthand. Hodge occupied the centre of the table, tail sweeping through her papers like an editor dissatisfied with punctuation. We've got motive, money, she muttered, means, poison or blackmail, and opportunity, too many people with keys. Hodge yawned and began washing. You're right, she said. I should have gone into journalism. Less honest work. The phone rang. She snatched it up. Agatha Raisin. A pause, then a low male voice. You should stop digging. And you should stop breathing, she snapped, but the line had already gone dead. Her pulse quickened. She stared at the receiver, then poured herself a gin. Cowards, she muttered. At least send hate mail with proper postage. The sound of rain intensified, and she felt the old thrill of danger. Vanity and fear made an intoxicating cocktail. The next morning brought a fresh shock. Bill phoned at 8, voice tight. Rupert Blake's gone missing. Agatha straightened. What do you mean, gone? His office says he left early last night. Never arrived home. His car's still in the car park. So either he's hiding or he's dead. Let's hope hiding, said Bill, and Raisin, stay out of it. Certainly, she said, lighting another cigarette. Hodge sneezed disapprovingly. She grabbed her coat. Come on, Hodge, we're going to Evesham. He blinked, unimpressed. Fine, guard the gin. At the Echo offices, chaos reigned. Reporters argued, phones rang, and the receptionist looked ready to defect. Agatha marched straight into Rupert's office. The air smelled of stale smoke and something acrid. Charles, following behind, whistled softly. Well, well, the man knew how to leave a mess. On the desk sat a small cassette recorder, the same model as the ones Polly Denning had used. Beside it, a neat white label. Confession. Agatha stared. Don't touch it. Do you take me for an idiot? Charles asked. Rhetorical question, of course. She pressed play. A hiss. Then Rupert's voice, distorted but recognizable. It wasn't supposed to kill her, just silence her. A thud, a scrape of chair, then the tape cut to static. Agatha hit stop, heart pounding. Well, that clears nothing and complicates everything. Typical, said Charles. We have half a confession and a missing suspect. Shall we phone Bill? Not yet. Agatha, we'll let him hear it later. I want a copy first. Evidence tends to vanish around here. She rifled through the drawers while Charles kept watch. Among the clutter she found a half-burned page, figures, dates, and a scrawled note. Transfer to R.B. Final payment. R.B., she murmured. Rupert Blake. He was paying Mrs. Greaves, not the other way round. Blackmail, perhaps? Likely, Polly found out. He panicked. Then what? He tried to scare her off, maybe slipped her something mild, only it wasn't mild enough. And now he's fled, Charles said, or been helped to disappear. They exchanged a look that was half triumph, half dread. Back in Carsely, Roy Silver burst into the cottage without knocking. "Aggie, the Echo's editor's missing, the police are swarming, and I smell opportunity." "You smell like cheap aftershave," she said. "Go home." "Darling, think of the optics, the heroic widow of reputation fighting corruption. We'll get you on television." "Television kills credibility faster than arsenic," she said. "Now hush, I'm thinking." Charles stretched in the armchair. "Let him chatter, Aggie. It keeps the air warm." "Oh, you're both impossible," she said, lighting another cigarette. "If I ever die mysteriously, promise me you'll blame each other. It'll save time." Roy perched on the sofa. "So what's the latest?" Agatha tapped the cassette. "We have a confession, of sorts. It wasn't supposed to kill her. The question is, who was her?" "Mrs. Greaves," said Charles. "Or Polly," said Agatha. "Either way, Rupert's in deeper than his cologne." She rose, pacing, smoke curled in lazy spirals toward the ceiling. Outside, the rain had softened to a mist, the kind that dampened ambition but not curiosity. "He'll surface," she said finally. "Men like Rupert always do. They can't resist the sound of their own excuses." Charles smiled faintly. "And when he does?" "I'll be waiting, with questions, gin, and possibly claws." "Delightful combination," said Roy. "Mind if I book the press conference now?" She gave him a look that could curdle milk. "If you value your life, don't." Hodge leapt onto the windowsill, tail twitching as thunder muttered somewhere beyond the hills. Agatha stared out at the lowering sky, a faint reflection of her own restlessness. "Confession or not," she murmured, "this isn't over." She stubbed out her cigarette, poured herself a gin, and watched Hodge stretch luxuriously. Outside, the drizzle began again, soft as gossip and twice as persistent. Carsely awoke to another storm of rumour, fueled this time by technology, or what passed for it in 1999. The Evesham Echo's answering machine had leaked the so-called confession, and half the Cotswolds now fancied themselves criminologists. Mrs. Greaves's murder, Polly Denning's death, and Rupert Blake's disappearance had fused into one lurid soap opera, starring Agatha Raisin as chief villainess. She slammed the latest issue of the paper onto her kitchen table. The headline screamed, "Tape of Terror, Local Woman Linked to Editor's Confession." "Linked," she fumed, lighting her first cigarette of the day. "Next they'll say I produced it for radio drama." Hodge, crouched on the Arga, blinked without sympathy. He had seen this level of indignation before, generally followed by gin at breakfast. The phone rang. It was Bill Wong, sounding cautious. "We've had the tape examined. Forensics say it's genuine in parts. Rupert's voice, no doubt, but the ending's spliced. Someone tampered with it." Agatha nearly dropped her cigarette. "So it's fake?" "Partly, which means someone wanted you to hear a confession that isn't one. That someone's probably rehearsing for their next murder," she said grimly. "Any luck finding Rupert?" "None. Either he's hiding or dead." "Well, if he's hiding, I hope it's somewhere without a bar." Bill sighed. "Agatha, please don't investigate this on your own." "Wouldn't dream of it," she lied, hanging up. By afternoon, the drizzle had returned, soft as guilt. Agatha sat at her window, watching Carsley's neat gardens blur into mist. Mrs. Bloxby arrived bearing a Victoria sponge, and the kind of expression that suggested moral surgery was about to be performed. "Dear Mrs. Raisin," she began gently, settling opposite her. "You look tired." "Tired of imbeciles," said Agatha, "and of being public enemy number one." "It must be dreadful, but I've been thinking—" "Never a good sign," Agatha muttered. Mrs. Bloxby smiled tolerantly. "You keep asking who benefits from these deaths, but perhaps you should ask, who benefits from your disgrace?" Agatha frowned. "Meaning?" "Someone who gains by undermining you, by turning the village against you." Agatha poured tea with a rattle. "You make me sound important." "You are, in Carsely at least. People envy confidence." "And hips that still fit through doorways," Agatha said dryly. "Precisely," Mrs. Bloxby replied, eyes twinkling. "Think, dear, who's been most eager to see you humbled lately?" Agatha's mind flicked back to the WI meeting, the sniggers, the false cards, the laughter. One face stood out, pretty, smug, and as self-satisfied as a cat on cream. "Melissa Sheldon," she said slowly. "That sanctimonious estate agent. She started the whole fiasco. She's been dying to see me fall." Then perhaps, Mrs. Bloxby said, rising, you should ask her why. Oh, I will, Agatha promised darkly, and I won't bring sponge cake. By the time Charles Frayth arrived that evening, she had already downed one gin and composed a plan. Melissa Sheldon, he repeated, incredulous. The woman who thinks beige is a personality. Don't underestimate her, said Agatha. She's clever. She knew about Polly's investigation. She had access to the WI Hall. She planted those fake index cards before my speech. Perhaps she just doesn't like you. Plenty of people don't like me. They usually survive. Charles smirked. So what's the plan? We break into her office tonight. Naturally, he said, as if burglary were the next logical step after tea. She's an estate agent. They all have secrets. And biscuit tins. It's practically company policy. What do we tell Bill if we're caught? We were lost, in an office, at midnight. Flawless, said Charles. You should have been a politician. And temper, he said, mostly temper. She sank into the armchair, cigarette glowing in the lamplight. Outside, the rain slowed to a murmur, and the village exhaled. You realize, Charles said softly, she'll strike back. Let her, Agatha murmured. At least it means I'm still interesting. Hodge stretched, unimpressed but loyal. Agatha watched the smoke curl toward the ceiling and allowed herself a small, grim smile. False confessions, she said. Seems we've all made a few. The cat purred, the kettle began to whistle, and for one fleeting moment Carsely felt almost safe, or as safe as it ever did between scandals. Rain rattled against the glass like gossip denied an audience. Agatha Raisin sat rigid in Melissa Sheldon's office, coat still damp, notebook heavy in her pocket, and temper wound tight enough to twang. Charles stood slightly behind her, as if moral support required a safe distance. Melissa leaned on the desk, calm as a hanging judge. You've been very naughty, Mrs. Raisin. Snooping, stealing, accusing, such unbecoming hobbies for a woman of experience. Experience keeps me alive, said Agatha, and out of prison. You can't say the same. Prison? Melissa laughed softly. Oh, do grow up. Nobody goes to prison for a little ambition. Or for murder. Melissa's smile faltered, then recovered. You really think you're clever, don't you? Charging about in your trench coat, frightening widows and editors. You wanted attention. Well, you've got it. You killed Polly Denning, said Agatha. The words landed like thrown stones. You killed her, then silenced Mrs. Greaves when she found out. Nonsense, said Melissa. Polly's death was an accident. She confronted me about the article drafts. You saw them in the biscuit tin. She said she'd expose me for plagiarism. We argued, she slipped, hit her head on the corner of the desk. I panicked. And Mrs. Greaves? She threatened to tell Bill Wong, wanted money to keep quiet. A little contribution to the WI fund, she called it. I couldn't have that. I poured her tea and added something gentle. She never even noticed. Agatha stared. Gentle? You call poisoning gentle? Melissa's voice hardened. People die, Mrs. Raisin, but reputations, reputations live forever. The room seemed smaller, the air thick with disinfectant and vanity. Charles shifted. You've rather overinvested in your own legend, Miss Sheldon. Better than fading into middle-aged invisibility. Melissa's gaze flicked to Agatha. That's what terrifies you, isn't it? Growing irrelevant. Agatha flushed. I'm relevant enough to see you hang. Hardly. Melissa stepped around the desk, voice honeyed. Who will believe the village pariah over me? I'll tell them you broke in, threatened me, stole my notes. You're already infamous. Then you'd better kill me too, Agatha said, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. The flame trembled. Because I'm not done talking. Melissa's smile thinned. Her hand darted to the paper knife on her desk. A slim silver blade, decorative but sharp. Perhaps that's the neatest solution. Charles reacted first, lunging between them. The knife flashed, grazing his sleeve. Agatha grabbed the nearest object, Melissa's dictaphone, and hurled it. It struck Melissa's wrist. The knife clattered to the floor. You maniac, Agatha shouted. That was designer polyester. Melissa lunged again, wild now. Her composure unravelled. Charles seized her arms. The struggle was messy, undignified, and blessedly brief. Somewhere beneath the shouting, the dictaphone whirred to life. Let me go, Melissa screamed. You don't understand. She was going to ruin me. "You've done that yourself," Agatha said. Suddenly the door burst open. Bill Wong filled the doorway, breathless, coat soaked. "Agatha, step away!" "She attacked me," Melissa cried, instantly switching to tears. "They broke in. She's mad." Bill's eyes flicked from Agatha to Charles, to the scattered papers, the overturned chair, the silver knife, then to the blinking red light on the dictaphone. "What's that?" Charles stooped, pressed rewind, and hit play. The machine hissed, then spilled Melissa's own voice. "Polly's death was an accident. She threatened to tell Bill Wong. I poured her tea and added something gentle. People die, but reputations live forever." Silence followed, thick and astonished. Melissa's knees gave way. She slid to the carpet, laughter dissolving into sobs. "You can't prove intent," she whispered. "You can't." Bill crouched beside her, voice gentle but firm. "I think the jury might manage." He glanced up at Agatha. "You all right?" "Never better," she said, though her hands trembled. "Next time I'm bringing a bodyguard." "You had one," said Charles dryly. "I'm sending you the invoice." 2 days later, Carsely was back to its favourite pastime, speculating. The Red Lion buzzed with theories. Some swore Melissa had framed Agatha from jealousy. Others claimed Agatha had driven the poor girl mad. The latter group, Agatha suspected, ordered halves of sherry and whispered behind lace curtains. She walked into the pub regardless, head high, trench coat immaculate. Conversations dipped, eyes followed. Charles and Bill occupied a corner table. Roy Silver arrived moments later, flinging his scarf like a battle flag. "Aggie, darling, my tragic heroine, I've brought you the next chapter of your public redemption." "Not now," she warned, sliding into the booth. "I'm still wanted for gossip." Bill smiled faintly. "You're officially cleared. Melissa confessed again at the station, said she only wanted to teach you humility. You're free." "Free but infamous," she said. "They'll dine on this for months." "Carsely always needs something to chew," said Charles. "Better you than the cricket club." Roy beamed. "Speaking of chewing, how about we give them a story to savour? Headline: Agatha Raisin, murdered but not defeated. I'll handle the copy, you pose with Hodge." "You'll handle nothing," said Agatha. "No headlines, no interviews, no sympathy. But think of the press." "I am," she said. "That's why I'm saying no." Bill lifted his pint. "To survival, then." "To reputation," said Charles. "Hard-earned, frequently dented, never dull." Agatha clinked glasses, then rose. "If anyone asks, I've retired from detective work. Again." "Until next week," murmured Charles. "Possibly sooner," added Roy. She left them chuckling. Outside, the rain had eased into drizzle, the village lights haloed in mist. She walked home slowly, her heels clicking on wet pavement, the scent of damp hedgerows and distant bonfire smoke curling through the air. At the cottage, Hodge greeted her with the usual disdainful stretch. Agatha kicked off her shoes, poured a small gin, and stared at the phone. The answering machine blinked with messages. Journalists, no doubt. She ignored them. The living room still bore the faint smell of cigarette smoke and victory. She dropped into her armchair and exhaled. The past week felt like a lifetime. Pranks, poisonings, false confessions, and now a confession too real to savour. She lit another cigarette and watched the tip glow. "You know, Hodge," she said, "they'll never let me forget this. I'll be that woman till the end of time." Hodge blinked, unimpressed. "Fine," she said. "At least I'm not boring." The cat leapt into her lap, purring despite himself. Agatha smiled faintly. Beneath the vanity and gin fumes, relief settled, tinged as ever with loneliness. She thought of Mrs. Bloxby's quiet wisdom, of Bill's patience, of Charles's unhelpful gallantry, of Roy's relentless publicity. A peculiar comfort came from knowing she was both exasperating and loved. The kettle clicked off in the kitchen. She rose, poured the water, and looked out at Carsley's darkened windows. Curtains twitched, lights blinked out one by one. The village would recover, gossip would fade, and someone would soon overcook a casserole or misplace a husband, life's small scandals replacing the grand ones. Agatha stirred her tea. "People die," she murmured, recalling Melissa's words. "But reputations live forever." She smiled crookedly, "so long as they spell the name right." She carried her mug to the window seat, watching drizzle bead the glass. Somewhere down the lane, the church clock chimed 10. For once the sound comforted her. Justice, or something like it, had been served. Hodge jumped up beside her, curling like a comma. "Good night, partner in crime prevention," she said. "Try not to shed on my vindication." He purred louder. She stubbed out her cigarette, leaving a wisp of smoke to spiral upward. Tomorrow, the gossip would begin anew. But tonight belonged to quiet, rain, and a small, satisfied sense that for all her flaws, Agatha Raisin had once again survived her own story. Carsely woke to drizzle, which in itself was reassurance. Sunshine suggested change, and the village had had quite enough of that. The rain restored the moral balance, clean pavements, muddied tempers, and just enough damp to justify staying indoors. Agatha Raisin stood at her window, cigarette in hand, watching the churchyard shimmer under its curtain of mist. Somewhere, Hodge batted a pen off her desk with surgical precision. "That," she muttered, "is symbolic of something, but I'm too tired to know what." It had been a week since Melissa Sheldon's arrest. The police had taken her away with the same solemn efficiency they used for garden fetes. Carsely, never one to waste emotion, had already folded the scandal into its social fabric. At the post office, people whispered, "Terrible business," with the same tone they used for creams gone off. Agatha dressed carefully for the Women's Institute Healing Tea, a name that promised reconciliation but would undoubtedly deliver sponge cake and selective amnesia. She chose her navy skirt, a crisp white blouse, and a new scarf in russet tones. It was pointedly not silk. "Right, Hodge," she said, applying coral lipstick. Time to be gracious. The cat blinked, unimpressed by moral effort. The WI hall smelled of carnations and forgiveness. Mrs. Bloxby presided at the urn, her expression that of a woman who believed peace could be brewed if one only found the right leaves. Agatha swept in with a smile bright enough to bleach memory. "Mrs. Raisin," cooed Doris Simpson, offering a plate of shortbread. "You poor dear, what a time you've had." "Oh, I thrive on adversity," said Agatha. "Keeps the complexion lively." A ripple of polite laughter followed. The villagers had collectively decided that pretending nothing had happened was the kindest route, especially since Agatha now enjoyed the curious prestige of survival. Mrs. Bloxby glided over. "You're looking splendid, dear. How are you holding up?" "Marvellously. I've decided nearly dying suits me." "You were brave, Agatha." "Nonsense. Self-defense. Anyone would have done the same, provided they looked as good under stress." Mrs. Bloxby chuckled softly. "Still, it's nice to see harmony restored." "Harmony's overrated," said Agatha. "It's gossip in fancy dress." At that, Mrs. Bloxby's smile deepened. "Then Carsely will never go naked." Bill Wong arrived briefly, out of uniform but unmistakably police. He accepted tea, endured praise, and managed to look both modest and mildly exasperated. "You're a magnet for trouble," he told Agatha quietly. "You say that as if it's a flaw." "It's an occupational hazard. Yours, not mine. Next time call me before breaking into anyone's office." "Depends who it is." "Exactly my fear," he said. Charles Fraith appeared soon after, immaculate in tweed and insincerity. "I see the WI survived your return, Aggie. Remarkable." "They're resilient women," she said. "Some of them have been forgiving people since rationing." He leaned closer. "You know, I rather miss the chaos. Things feel dull now you're respectable again." "Respectable? Don't insult me." "Then cheers to infamy," he murmured, raising his cup. Roy Silver burst through the door next like a gust of London air scented with expensive deodorant. "Aggie, my love, I've had a thought. Agatha Raisin, murdered but not defeated. It sings." "So would my solicitor," she said. "No articles, Roy." "But darling, the world must know the real you." "They already do. That's the problem," he pouted. "Fine, but at least let me plan your triumphant return to the lecture circuit." "No more public speaking," said Agatha firmly. "I'll stick to living dangerously in private." Roy sighed, deflated but admiring. "You're impossible and glorious." "Both by design," she said, accepting another slice of sponge. By the time the tea ended, forgiveness had been ceremonially poured and consumed. He women of Carsely left smiling, their peace secured by carbohydrates. Only Mrs. Bloxby lingered, helping fold the linen. "It really is good to have you back, Agatha," she said. "I worried you might leave after everything." Agatha hesitated. "I thought about it. But where would I go? London's too sharp, Cyprus too hot, and no one there knows how to make proper tea." "Then you're home." Agatha gave a small, awkward smile. Heaven help me, I think so. Outside, the drizzle had thickened into honest rain again. Charles offered her a lift and she accepted. Vanity had its limits. He dropped her at the cottage with his usual lazy charm. Do try to stay out of scandal till at least Monday. I make no promises, she said, slamming the door before he could reply. Hodge greeted her with a disdainful meow that translated clearly as late again. Don't start, she told him, shedding coat and heels. Some of us maintain social order. He ignored her, curling up in his usual spot on the armchair. She poured herself a gin, the bottle clinking companionably against the glass. Outside, the rain whispered against the windows, the soft, familiar voice of Carsely itself. She sat, Hodge purring against her leg, and lit a cigarette. The smoke rose lazily, curling in thin grey ribbons toward the ceiling. You know, Hodge, she said, reputation's like one of Mrs. Bloxby's plants. Everyone waters it, and no one admits to pruning. The cat yawned, unimpressed. Murder's easier to solve than gossip, she continued. At least murderers confess. Villagers just change the subject. Hodge flicked his tail, a gesture of philosophical agreement. The phone rang. She ignored it. Probably Roy or some newspaper desperate for quotes. She reached for her gin instead. The evening light had softened to amber, the kind that made even the humblest cottage look romantic if one didn't inspect the skirting boards too closely. Agatha watched the glow on the rain-streaked glass. Pride dented, heart bruised, reputation battered, yet she felt oddly content. Life in Carsely always trundled on, absurd, exasperating, and comfortingly small. Well, Hodge, she murmured, stroking his fur, until the next corpse or casserole. He stretched luxuriously, claiming the final word with a purr. The cigarette burned low. Smoke drifted upward, a pale ghost in the lamplight, the last whisper of scandal fading into ordinary evening air. And somewhere beyond the hedgerows, Carsely exhaled, smug in its restored tranquility, already gossiping about the next storm in a teacup.